We've got a new report here in front of us from Migration Watch UK, who have asked the question, how can the UK stop relying on overseas doctors? So let's talk now to Jeremy Hutton from Migration Watch. This is new research. Let's find out why the UK is so reliant on foreign doctors. Jeremy, very good morning to you. Happy Easter to you.
Hi Mike, thanks for having me. Happy Easter to you as well.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. You know, we hear so many myths about the NHS because there's so much nonsense talked about it and why parts of it don't work, why they don't have enough staff here, why they don't train enough staff there. What have you found, and what was the reason for you getting into this study in the first place?
We found that increasingly the doctors joining the NHS are coming from overseas, so we're not training enough doctors in the UK, and now it seems that the actual amount of medical trainees being taken on every year at British universities, is outnumbered by the number of foreign doctors that are recruited every year, just in the NHS England as health and community care doctors.
Right.
If you include all doctors on the medical registry, it's likely that it's already over half, maybe up to as high as 60%.
And what's the reason for their reliance on foreign doctors? Is it because it's cheaper? Because we hear this from the BMA. My understanding is that the BMA, the British Medical Association, which is a union of doctors really in all but name, has sort of put a limit, a ceiling, if you like, on the numbers of doctors that can be trained in Britain. For example, they don't offer, some people say, enough places at medical school, and they've got a kind of cap on that. Is there a reason why? Is it because they think it's too expensive to train doctors, or what?
Well, it is indeed extremely expensive to train a doctor. I think, off the top of my head, the figure, excluding student loans, is about 100. No, sorry, I blanked to that figure. But it's a lot of money, and training the amount of doctors we do every year costs billions of pounds.
Right.
So to increase the number of doctors we train will be very expensive. However, it's also the case that other countries seem to do it a lot cheaper, maybe because that's how things often work in other countries with exchange rates and that sort of thing. There are some people who think that the reason there's a limit is because doctors lobby for a continued limit.
Yeah.
However, there's all sorts of different things within a doctor's career cycle that might encourage them to maybe even leave the workforce early or emigrate to another country themselves, where they'll get a better work-life balance and maybe better wages. There's all sorts of reasons why people don't see out their career in the NHS. And then at the very beginning, we're simply not training enough to deal with a growing population, which is largely driven by immigration. Yeah,
and this is the other problem, though, of course, that a lot of people who train to be doctors in this country then go into work for the NHS for a while, but then go private. And then so suddenly it's a bit like, you know, if you go and become a fighter pilot for the RAF, it's a bit like, you know, in the first week after you've been trained, you disappear off and go and fly planes for the Americans or something. You know, there has to be probably a better way of retaining the people who we've trained, it seems to me, in the NHS. I've always had a problem in the past with the ability of doctors to work in both the NHS and in private care, because it seems to me that you're not really fulfilling your proper duty, are you?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem that has been a trend in the past of people, you know, getting the qualification, enjoying the government subsidy on their training, which, as I've said, is quite substantial, and then going for greener pastures. However, to be fair to those doctors, it is a very difficult job, and they're under a lot of pressure. And the more doctors that, say, leave the NHS early, that actually increases the burden on those that remain, and thus increases the drain of these good doctors to other lines of work or other forms of employment.
Right. I mean, I'm told that the funding cap on government-funded medical training places is around about the cost of £165,000 each. That excludes student loans. But they say the numbers of people are capped in order to maintain high standards. But of course, as you say, if there's not enough doctors because of the fact that there's a cap on the numbers being trained, then the ones who are trained are going to be working under worse conditions, aren't they?
Absolutely. So that was the argument that James cleverly made a few years ago when he was the Education Secretary. Right. It later came out in the interview that it was in fact about the money. Yeah. And there's no shortage whatsoever of people who want to be doctors and have the skills required. I mean, one MP pointed out that there's most of the doctors coming to the UK from Bulgaria aren't actually Bulgarian. They're British people who just got trained in Bulgaria because they couldn't get trained in the UK because of this ridiculous cap.
Right. But do they get counted as foreign doctors then?
They would under the General Medical Registry, yes.
Right. So when we see figures which say something like 46% of doctors joining the NHS in 2022 were foreign nationals, I mean, that wouldn't include them, would it?
So that's there's two different sorts of figures. This is NHS data, which is all by nationality.
Right.
The alternative set of figures that often gets used is the General Medical Registratory,
Right.
which uses the country where they gain their qualification. So I prefer this data because it means that the people we're talking about are definitely British nationals or not British nationals,
Right.
whilst the other stuff is a little bit more uncertain.
One that I find interesting as a statistic is this one, healthcare visas, which says issued for all medical and care occupations, including dependents, represented almost 90% of all long-term sponsored work visas granted in 2022. And over half of all work visas were not considered dependents. So when people tell me, oh, we haven't got enough foreign doctors and we haven't got enough workers in the NHS because of Brexit, that doesn't sound right at all.
No, absolutely not. It's purely a failure to train, and this is extended to nurse training as well, as we showed in the past. But the doctor training is a far more egregious thing because the amount of foreign doctors is just so massive compared to the number of UK students.
Right. And I know that you probably may not have figures on this, but what about people coming here to train as doctors from overseas? Is that something that happens? You know, would we be having medical students here from other nationalities?
Yes, we do include that in the report. It is quite a small proportion of the total, a few hundred every year. However, what that proves is that the total medical training capacity in the UK is not being used to its full extent for British students.
Right.
So if the government simply wanted to use up total medical training capacity up to the levels that were being trained 1 or 2 years ago, then we'd have at least 1,500 more people being trained as doctors in the UK per year that were British.
And that would absolutely feed through, presumably, into the workforce and into the hospitals of this nation, which are currently understaffed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so a bit more sort of hypocrisy from the people that run the NHS, really, isn't it? Well, it's a very interesting report. Can people get their hands on it if they wish to, Jeremy?
Yep, it's on our website. It was also in the Times this morning on page 4, so maybe pick up a copy and give it a read. OK, excellent. Always a good idea to buy the Times. Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. That's Jeremy Hutton there from Migration Watch UK.